Industrial engineers often encounter people who do not know what industrial engineering is or what an industrial engineer does. Even industrial engineers themselves may struggle to define industrial engineering. I know that I definitely struggle, and every time I get asked what is industrial engineering, I hesitate and I find myself giving a slightly different answer each time. So in this video, instead of actually defining industrial engineering, I wanted to talk about some of the reasons why it is so difficult to explain and understand. Some of these reasons relate to the nomenclature industrial engineering, some of them relate to the history of industrial engineering, and some of them relate to the nature of the industrial engineering discipline. I'm going to start off by talking about the nomenclature and history of the term industrial engineering. So there have been discussions for a long time about whether the term industrial engineer is appropriately representative of industrial engineering, or whether that term has become obsolete. The term by itself gives little insight into what industrial engineering is. Furthermore, there are embedded societal perceptions of what industry and engineer mean that may be limiting in the case of the industrial engineer. So, a person hearing the term industrial engineer for the first time may not be able to intuitively deduce what an industrial engineer does, the same way a person hearing the term electronics engineer or cardiologist for the first time may actually be able to intuitively deduce that, oh, a cardiologist deals with the cardiovascular system and an electronics engineer deals with electronics. We can analyze the nomenclature industrial engineer a little bit more by talking about the term industrial by itself and the term engineer by itself. To begin, the term industrial is often linked to manufacturing and production, which gives off the impression that an industrial engineer works only in factories or the manufacturing industry. This impression is consistent with the early form of industrial engineering. After all, it is generally agreed upon that industrial engineering had its roots in the first industrial revolution, and that early industrial engineering focused on making improvements in manufacturing and production. However, despite being a child of the first industrial revolution, industrial engineering has evolved since then. The term industrial is broadening to encompass all sorts of industries, not just manufacturing and production industries like it did in the past. Industry could mean anything from the entertainment industry to the healthcare industry, both of which are unexpected industries to associate with engineers. However, industrial engineers are present in virtually any industry all over the world. Furthermore, industrial engineering methods are being applied to humanitarian aid, disaster relief, the military, public policy, and even sports, all of which are not usually thought of as industries. So now that we've discussed the term industrial, we can move on to the term engineer, which also happens to be atypical and nuanced for the case of the industrial engineer. So typically, engineers use the hard sciences to solve technical problems, but for the case of the industrial engineer, they use both the hard sciences and the soft sciences to solve a wide variety of problems, not just technical problems. And when it comes to the public perception of an engineer, we typically imagine someone who deals with construction and mechanics and that their primary role is that of fixing things. However, the reality of engineers, not just industrial engineers, but engineers in general, is different to the public perception. Engineers are actually much more involved in design and creative work, and that is definitely true for the case of the industrial engineer. By analyzing the term industrial engineer, we can see that the societal perception of industry and engineer does not necessarily align with what industrial engineering is or what industrial engineers do. So that is why the history and the nomenclature of industrial engineering contributes to why it is so difficult to explain. Now I can move on to discuss why the nature of the industrial engineering discipline itself also contributes to why it is so difficult to explain. So, if I could describe the nature of the industrial engineering discipline, I would say that it is broad and flexible and variable. Industrial engineering covers a lot of different subject matter, all the way from the hard sciences to the soft sciences. So although there is a lot of mathematics and statistics that goes into industrial engineering, there is also a lot of business and law and even some humanities subjects. Industrial engineering is not really constrained by any certain industry or context or knowledge field. It is more so conceptual in the sense that it aims to make improvements that can be measured scientifically in any context or industry. So in that sense, when somebody asks, what does an industrial engineer do, there is no one answer. In fact, there are dozens of things, maybe hundreds, thousands of things that an industrial engineer can do. By exploring the nomenclature, history, and nature of the industrial engineering discipline, we conclude that this discipline is indeed difficult to explain because industrial engineering cannot be summarized by one sentence, and not all industrial engineers do the same type of work. Rather, industrial engineers have in common a certain way of thought or set of skills, but this specific set of skills can look very, very different in different contexts and industries. And that is why industrial engineering can be so difficult to explain and understand. Having said all of that, though, industrial engineering obviously can be explained, and it's actually very fun to explain, and I plan to define it more in future videos. But for now, I just wanted to explore this little quirk about industrial engineering and how difficult it can be to start explaining it. So if you enjoyed this video, please consider giving it a like and subscribing to the channel. Thank you so much for watching. By the way, if you saw me looking down, it's because I was relying on some notes. A lot of what I was saying was things that I wrote down in my master's dissertation. So I will link that down below if you're interested in checking that out. And thanks again for watching.